mercy. Okay. Brushy, I'd like to call to order the Brushy Creek Regional Utility Authority Board of Directors meeting for Wednesday, June 24th. Call the roll. Vice President Flores.
Here.
Secretary Shaw.
Here.
Director Kirkland.
Here.
Director Baker.
Here.
And Director Anderson.
Here.
Okay, please note the roll. All members are present. Now for citizen communication, item number 3. We have some people signed up to speak. You get 3 minutes to speak. Please state your full name and address when you begin your remarks. The first person I have signed up is Colleen Phillips, who would like to speak about North Rim.
My name is Colleen Phillips, 17701 North Rim Drive, Leander. The residents of North Rim have come to each BCRUA board meeting to express our opposition to the power lines for your project running through our community. The COVID pandemic is now at the highest rate of infection ever in Williamson and Travis counties. It is not safe for our community to be here. The governor has said to stay home unless absolutely necessary. 3 of us are here tonight, at risk to us and our families, representing the 103 homeowners in our community who cannot be here because it endangers their health and safety. I will take my 3 minutes to read those names and acknowledge their unity of opposition to the North Rim route. Laura Arend Horn, Hunter Arend, Jean Ashlock, Sherilyn and Brad Bailey, Jan Battles, Jennifer Berry, Jim and Harmon Brewer, Christina and Dieter Billick, Deborah and Peter Bisson, Herb Bowl, Norm Brown, Rebecca Brunn, Tom Foster, Barbara and Mark Gleinser, Milana and Jeff Greenwell, Benita and Alvis Griffin, Jane and Bill Hamlin, Danny and Chris Harris, Melinda and Tim Hawkins, Linda and John Henry, Herbert and Aurora Hillen, Kim and Linda Hezerot, Charlie Hiltz, Malcolm Scholl, Michelle and Mark Burton, Cheryl and Jeff Cameron, Linda and Gary Chandler, Ron Chitsey, Brian Codian, Al and Jan Colley, Jackie and Doug Copland, Gordon D., Ann and Jim Deathlifson, Warner and Gordon Derrick, Lynn and Lance Eng, Michael and Patty Ewert, Patty and Bob Hogan, Laura and Bruce Helscher, Sam and Pat Hood, Marcia and John Isaacson, Matthew and Catherine Stevenson Jackson, Joy and Walt Joseph, Brent Johnson, Gregory Kerwick, Ellen and Philip Klipp, Jean and Paul Kite, Liz and Tom Lanford, Tina and Steve Lau, Brenda and Barry Laurent, Tony and Doug Lehman, Tom Loans, Tony and Rick Malone, Janet Manzanero, Richard and Stacy McCall, Wayne and Eileen McDilda, Patricia Mencio, Pam Miller.
Ms. Phillips, your time is up.
Thank you. For the record, I would like to say that we've got at least another 100 residents that have gone unnamed. Thank you.
Thank you. Also signed up, we have Mr. Ben Trace, also here about North Rim.
So as Colleen illustrated, under normal circumstances, we could have filled this hall. And I'm here speaking on behalf of them because Northland appears on the agenda once again. Always swinging in the dark a little bit here because we never know exactly what's going to be presented. Don't know what possible board action means. So it's always a struggle to try to communicate in 3-minute snippets. But what I do know, last January I was blindsided. The routes were described as essentially same with a few tweaks. But one of those tweaks put a 1/4 mile of new power lines on our property. This has never been in any of the previous presentations. If you allow that to happen, that will be a huge financial hit to our personal finances, as our home is our largest asset, as most of you are. We have been the face of our community, and in our opposition has been speaking to you every month. Whether deliberate or through indifference, I know I felt targeted and imitated by this tweak. I feel punished because I've exercised my rights as a citizen. And I think most citizens that heard the sequence of events would agree with my perspective. Beyond that slap in the face, when you dug into the technical memo, it was errors. Probably some of what you see tonight will be corrections on those. To me, I'm still skeptical because there are over 1,000 feet missing. It's blamed on PEC quoting software. However, the most blatant omission was the cost and the impact to the community. During a meeting with State Representative Goodwin, it was stated by your contractor that he cannot add that into his cost estimates. And I somewhat would agree with that. I think it is the board's responsibility to factor in these community impacts in your decisions. I know you get it from the questions I heard in January. Matt Baker asked about the count and type of properties impacted. You know single-family residents are impacted more than undeveloped land. Jason Anderson asked which route minimized the single phase to a double 3-circuit, 3-phase upgrades. You know through those renderings that that massive upgrade has a much larger impact than others. I know the board recognizes governing takes more than reading an Excel sheet. Representing the interests of citizens and communities is the very reason government exists. It is the reason why the BCRUA has a board of elected officials overseeing it. There is a solution here, but it won't come for 3-minute speeches or town halls between residents and contractors who do not have decision-making authorities. Please engage, and we can come to a resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have signed up Liz Ebersole. To speak on North Rim.
Liz Aversald, 1825 North Rim Drive. Our country is hurting right now. We are more divided than we have ever been. Our communities and our cities are being torn apart. People we care for are losing their jobs, they are losing their businesses. People that we love are getting sick and they are dying. And we are making enemies of each other for everything. Yet in this bleakness, I choose hope. We are better than this. There has to be a different path. It doesn't have to be us versus you. It doesn't have to be you win and we lose. Change can start with a different perspective, with empathy, and change can start with the people in this room. I have come here month after month and advocated for the community that I love. I have played by the rules that you have given me. I have been respectful, I have been polite, and I have appealed to you to consider the massive impact that your project has on my community. Yet somehow, after all of these months, I have personally ended up worse. How is it possible that it keeps getting worse? Tell me how we got a new study that moved the route to a quarter of a mile onto my property. I ask you to think for a minute, how would you feel? It broke me. But my story of participating in democracy and advocating for my community is not going to end with this kind of ending. It is not going to end with punishment. It can't be the legacy of this board. Let us be an example of how citizens and government can come together and create a solution that works for all of us. There doesn't have to be winners and losers. We can have a good outcome in this. The box that I am put in requires me to spend 3 minutes pleading my case to you. Pleading my case for a decision that will last me 30 years. And I have still followed your rules, but this is not the forum for this. This is not how we govern and make decisions. This is theater. Problem solving and working tough solutions requires us to dialogue, and that is the very thing that is missing from our communities right now. I ask that before you make any binding decisions, you give us the courtesy of a conversation between this group and us, not contractors, but this group of decision makers so that we can come to a solution that works for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jason Moore, I think, is called in. He's on the remote, Monique. Do you have him listed?
I don't see him online.
Okay.
I'm allowing a number 636 number. I'm allowing that person to talk to see if that's him or not.
Okay.
The 636 number is actually Rebecca Goldstein from Weaver, just for clarification.
Thank
Okay.
you. Okay, so Jason Moore, we are calling you, and we're going to move on. I also have a couple other people registered, but may just want to listen to the meeting. Mr. Deathlison and Herbert Bowl. Just listening, okay. Anyone else wish to speak? Okay. Moving on to item 4A, consider approval of the BCRUA meeting minutes for May 27th, 2020. Okay, motion by Kirkland,
Second.
second by Flores. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Call agenda item 5A, consider a resolution authorizing the president to execute an engagement letter with Weaver and Tidwell LLP for annual financial audit services.
Hi, good evening. I'm Lori Langford with the City of Round Rock. I'm the Deputy CFO. And this resolution is just to engage Weaver and Tidwell for fiscal year 20 year-end audit services for a total price of $33,000 a year. And as you heard, Rebecca is on the line if you have any questions for her.
Okay. Board, do you have any questions for Rebecca?
Or myself, whichever.
Or Lori?
Lori, how many years have they been doing this?
We've used them for 4 years, and this is our 5th year for an extension.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, we have a resolution.
So we need a motion for that? Motion to approve?
Okay, motion to approve.
Second.
And second by Secretary Shaw. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on. Call item 6A, consider an update regarding Northrim Alternative Electric routing evaluation and possible board action. And we have Mr. Archer from Walker Partners.
Good evening, Madam President and Board of Directors. Tonight I'm going to go through a presentation providing an update on the North Rim evaluation. The primary meeting objectives, I want to give you an update on the alternatives evaluation and coordination efforts that have occurred since we last talked about North Rim at the January 22nd board meeting. And then I wanted to conclude by providing a recommendation for a route to select for final design. As a refresher, we've been looking at 3 different routes to convey power upgrades from the intersection of Nameless and FM 1431 to the intersection of 1431 and Trails End Road. On the map here, the green route, shown as Route 1, is also the North Rim route, which is the route that was originally recommended coming out of the 2016 preliminary engineering phase. The blue route, called Route 2, or the southern route, is a route that follows an existing 3-phase line down south of North Rim Drive before meeting with Lost Ridge Circle, and then following North Rim Drive east of Lost Ridge Circle. And then the pink route is the 1431 route, Route 3, which essentially follows 1431 from Nameless over to Trails End Road. As an example of what the upgrade consists of, each of these line extensions, Route 1, 2, or 3, involve the construction of double circuit 3-phase poles, which is the second from the right. For illustration, a single-phase power pole is the furthest left, and a 3-phase power pole is next to it, to give you a sense of the scale or the magnitude of the different pole types. To the far right is a transmission power pole structure. We have that in there just to give you a sense of the relative size comparison. This project is not a transmission project. It does not include poles of that design. This is a distribution system project. These renderings were also shown in January. On the left is a photograph from North Rim Drive of an existing single circuit 3-phase pole, and to the right is a conceptual rendering of the replacement of those poles with the proposed project double circuit. And then this photograph is on the left is also an existing pole structure from North Rim Drive, a single-phase pole. And to the right is a rendering of the replacement of those poles with double circuit 3-phase poles. So since January, we've had the opportunity to coordinate with a number of items. There's been several meetings, individual meetings with property owners on North Rim Drive. A number of those meetings have included participation from various board members. We did have a meeting with State Rep Goodwin that included Vice President Flores, Karen Bondi, and myself, and several residents from North Rim on February 24th at the Capitol. When in-person meetings started to be discouraged, a lot of the communication moved to email and responding to questions in that way. And then we've had the opportunity since January to also dig in with PEC to address a few items that I'm going to talk about in more detail a little bit later, but one of those was working through and understanding their costing methodology, how they develop cost estimate when they put together a project and then come to BCRUA to have you pay for that line extension. And then also obtaining their written approval of the southern route. They had the opportunity since the January 22nd meeting to get some of their staff to walk that alignment and confirm that it was a viable alternative. And then lastly, there's an update to the North Rim Technical Memorandum that came out at the beginning of June that was shared with the residents and others. In that technical memorandum, there are a number of design updates that I wanted to highlight. One of those is we had the electrical engineer on the project, PEC's contractor, synchronize the starting point of all 3 routes to be at a common point of beginning. Previously, the North Rim and Southern route started at a different location than the 1431 route. So they put those all at the same location, which added a few hundred feet of length to both the North Rim route and the Southern route. This was not taken care of in the June update, but had been part of the update back in the winter of 2019. But there was a revision to the North Rim alignment, well, Route 1, which follows the length of North Rim, due to some PEC infrastructure changes west of North Rim Drive down at the bottom of the hill, where they voided some easements of theirs and removed infrastructure that required a realignment to get from the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill. One item that we looked at in particular was a difference in the route distance for the three routes between what was reported and prepared in PEC's proprietary mapping and costing system and what you find in a point-to-point mapping study, whether you go do on-the-ground survey or go trace it with Google Earth. So we talked to PEC about that discrepancy, and PEC told us that their system is the basis for how you develop design and how they develop cost. They don't use any other system for it. They use their proprietary mapping and costing model. So the measurements in the model are what they use. We had aerial field and survey data that was used to develop other costs outside of some of the PEC infrastructure, like development of the access road, right-of-way clearing, and also field and survey data was used to establish pole locations for those routes because you needed to have boots on the ground and understand where a pole would be placed. The only difference then between a Google Earth or point-to-point measurement and what PEC has in their model is conductor length, just the wire that's strung between the poles. PEC doesn't take this difference into account when they prepare cost for a line extension. That's not part of their costing methodology. They look at that as a negligible cost, so they'll charge BCRUA based on what their mapping system comes up with as a length. So the cost estimates were updated, not taking into any account on a revision of the difference between point-to-point mapping and their mapping system, but there was a cost update to add a couple hundred feet of length to modify the point of beginning for the North Rim route and the Southern route, and to add in some additional land rights that would be required for those couple hundred feet of additional length. And lastly, we worked with PEC and M&S Engineering that's been doing the technical work on this to have them put together some preliminary mapping of the new pole locations and the locations where there would be self-supporting poles based on their preliminary design work, which is shown in this exhibit here. New pole locations are in red boxes. So on the North Rim Drive alternative, there's a total of 5 new poles on the North Rim Drive as a result of the upgrades, and those 5 poles are all on the east side of North Rim Drive, east of Lost Ridge Circle. And then for the Southern route, it also includes 2 new poles on Lost Ridge Circle for a total of 7 new poles. And then self-supporting poles, you can see, are highlighted in yellow. Looking then to the cost here, if you looked at the column that's the second from the right, is the total cost of both construction and easements. The North Rim Route 1 option totals at about $1.88 million. The Southern route comes in at about $2.2 million, and the 1431 route is about $3.5 million, or roughly about twice what the North Rim route is. And so based on the additional coordination and communication that we've had since the January board meeting and conversations we've had with North Rim and PEC, the Design Oversight Committee is recommending that the board select Route 2, which is the Southern route, to advance into final design. And as a note, construction on the North Rim project is scheduled for the 2025 to 2027 timeframe, so several years down the road.
Questions? Board, do you have any questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I go?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I've walked from one end to the other end of that North Rim. I took pictures of every single pole. I advocated for a town hall, but then I was told that certain residents were not interested in that and that they were satisfied with the Southern route. So I'm a little confused about that. Two, like Liz was talking about, there's no win in this. This is a lose-lose for everybody. I have been looking at the numbers, and my first loyalty is to the citizens of Leander. And I'm going to tell the people of Northern, I tried to get to the 1431, but it is so unfair to Leander residents, I couldn't get there. Now, I felt a little bit better when I found out that some of the residents were happy about the south route. I got a little sick feeling now that I find out that people are still upset about that. But of the three routes, that one is the less of the evils, in my opinion. So I hate this vote, but it is what it is.
So I kind of agree with that. I think that
Turn
this
your.
board. Okay. I agree with Jason. I think this board represents the 270,000 residents of Leander, Round Rock, and Cedar Park. And we need to do what's in the best interest for them. And I appreciate that Mr. Shaw has gone out and met with the residents and got some additional data for us. So all three of these cities are still going to grow. They're not done growing out. The numbers for Williamson County and Western Williamson County are only going to double in size in the next 10 to 15 years, according to Campo. So, I mean, we need to have water in order for us to make our commitments on growth. So, that's my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to say sorry. You know, a lot of this was determined before many of us were in this position. I appreciate all the feedback. I appreciate all the time that our partners, the citizens, the board members, our other elected officials that represent the county and that district have spent on conversations. I know some people don't feel they've had enough time to have these conversations. Unfortunately, as an elected body, we can only have so many people present for one of those types of meetings before it's a walking quorum. So that's part of the reason we haven't been able to do something like that. We spent a lot of time on this. I think the longer we wait, we get away from the fiscal responsibility that we're in right now to proceed with a decision for our project. I know it impacts a lot of the homeowners. I feel like the southern option is a good compromise. It's just the option 3 to go down 1431 to hand that cost of 1.6 million, as well as whatever truly those easement requisitions will cost, is more than we can ask our citizens of our cities that we that they should have to be committed with. So it's a lose-lose in some ways, but again, we have to provide citizens of our cities with water. So I think the southern option is the best option. And I'd like to make a motion, unless anyone else has anything else to say. Anyone on the phone? So I move that the board select Route 2, the southern. Yeah, I mean, if I asked if anyone else had anything else to say.
I didn't know if, like, are we able to say something right now?
No.
Yeah, I can open it up for discussion, sure.
Yeah. This is Mr. Pile. Can I say something?
Well,
Hello?
I think Liz is up at the podium, so I'm going to allow her to speak, and then I'll call on if there's anyone else.
So I don't know where Mr. Shaw got the feedback from that we didn't want to meet. I mean, January happened, and then COVID happened. So I don't know where that feedback come from. It certainly didn't come from us. If it's the southern route, we ask that you work with us on where those poles go, what the color of those poles looks like, and that you rip out existing poles and don't leave us with abandoned pole farm. I mean, can we, I get it, I get it. I would also argue that the cost to your citizens over a 30-year period for this is a fraction of what the cost is to our citizens. If we want to look at nickels and dimes, it's far, far more impactful to us. We got to live with this for 30 years. Every day we're going to be reminded of you all when we walk out our front door and walk our dogs. I get it. Can you work with us on what this looks like? Can you not just authorize this and hand us off to a contractor and say, good luck, please don't come back? Can this continue to be a dialogue with us that we can be kind to our community and where these poles go, and you don't come in and just rape us?
Ms. Abersold, I can respond to the offer of the town hall. So we did offer a town hall based on Board Member Shaw's request, and Ben Treese said that he didn't think a town hall was the way
At that
to
moment, it wasn't the right time. We want to talk to you in a smaller group format. And I will say you were misled by these slides in terms of what the communication has been. You were just misled. And if you accept that as fact, then you are accepting things that are dishonest. That has not been what the case has been in terms of communication with us. We really believe if we can just get in a room and talk to you, that this format is theater and it doesn't work. But being deliberate about where these polls go and what they look like and what the impact is in our community, talk to us about what, let us have a voice in that. You owe us that. We deserve that. This is where we live. That's our group, that's our request. You can make that happen. You can order them to have to work with us and not just come in and one day we got a pole farm and a bunch of abandoned lines.
Okay. I will offer that PEC is, we're basically using their engineer to design it, and they're the ones who are going to be building it, so we could certainly reach out to them to talk to them about the poles and definitely have that dialogue.
And Karen, I can be part of that conversation.
Certainly.
Yeah, I think whoever's on the board, we can, when we get to that point. I think your time is up, so I think there might have been another gentleman. Did you catch his name? Mr. Phillips, you wish to speak?
This is Mr. Bilek on the phone.
Mr. Phillips, okay. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Thank you for giving me the permission to speak. I have a question in reference to the estimates that were conducted. First question would be, did you all contact the Texas Department of Transportation and see if these poles on 1431 could be posted in the right-of-way? I know you have a tremendous amount for easement costs there. Was this discussion with Texas Department conducted? That's one of the questions. And then I remember at the very beginning of this whole process, I had put in open records request, and at the desire of some homeowners, I withdrew this record request for all the documentation, emails, and other information between all the board members and so on and so on. I withdrew it because I thought this could be worked out in a nicely way, but it looks like the decision has been made here today. So I personally regret my move that I withdraw this open records request, because open records requests are always very interesting to see the decision process that happened. But my question is really, did you look at the cost, talk to Texas Department of Transportation about using the existing right-of-way? And I think somebody should be able to answer this right now. Thank you.
Yes, this is Aaron Archer responding to the first question. The poles are not going to be placed in the right-of-way. They're going to be placed in a dedicated easement adjacent to the right-of-way, which is a design standard that PEC requires. So this is a requirement from the power utility to obtain dedicated easements.
So there was never discussion with Texas Department of Transportation if you could place it
It's
in
not,
the
it's
right
not
of
a
way.
discussion with TxDOT. It's a design requirement from their electric utility that they place them in a dedicated easement. They will not place them in the right-of-way.
Okay.
It's not a TxDOT decision, it's PEC's.
And it sounds like the whole cost estimating is a black box that nobody knows what's really happening in the black box. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, one more time?
I have the feeling that the cost estimating that's being done, it sounded like all the information how this cost is being done is not actually known to outside person. It's more like internal algorithm that calculate the cost. Is that correct?
The costs are developed by PEC, the power utility that will construct the project. It will be conveyed to BCRUA basically as an invoice to be paid for a line extension.
Right. But nobody knows the exact details how this cost come about, right? I mean, there's some high-level numbers, but what's behind these numbers is not clear, right?
It's all embedded in PEC's proprietary mapping and costing system that we do not have access to, which is why we're using PEC's design engineer to do this study.
Okay, so it's all, so the cost estimate is a black box that nobody knows how they come about with this cost. I understand that. Okay, that's all from my side. Thank you for having the opportunity to talk.
Thank you. Okay.
Chelsea Coburn.
Okay, Chelsea, are you on the line or in the, I don't know who's who. Okay, Chelsea?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I just wanted to echo Liz Abersold's sentiment that absolutely continued community involvement and voicing of concerns needs to proceed, and that this is just no longer the appropriate forum for it. There's still going to be just continued community concerns that need to be brought about, need to be continually considered. So I wanted to just ask the board to consider exactly how that can proceed, not necessarily a stand up and talk for 3 minutes or a town hall sort of format, more of a sit down format like we did have in the Capitol with our state rep. If we could, get something like that on the schedule as soon as possible to make sure that everybody fully understands what this is going to look like going forward.
Okay. We're writing all this down. We're committing that. I mean, we will have most of this board still with us since the election's not till November. I don't think anyone's moving on, so I can commit to that. I think Renee, sure. Having more conversations, that's absolutely doable. Any other public questions, comments? I have a couple of people in the audience. Come on up, please, and state your name. And well, Colleen was just up here, so.
Colleen Phillips, 17701 North Rim Drive. Just a follow-up to Liz's plea of the continued communication. You said you would be willing to bring that up to PEC. What guarantee can you give us tonight that that will be included in whatever decision you end up making? In other words, you could make a decision, you could tell them, but we may never hear from them, or they could just say, yeah, we talked to you once and we're good. What guarantee can you give that we would be involved in this process? Because there is an immediate impact to our community, to our neighborhood, to our families. And like, she said that over 30 years, the additional $1.8 million to run it up 1431, some thousand a year, I don't know, not that much compared to what the impact would be in our local neighborhood. So if you can't do 1431, which doesn't make sense, because I'm sure the money's there and it can be found, and it won't, maybe if you can show us why that is such a negative impact to the citizens of Leander as a whole versus our small community, that would be great. But then also provide some kind of assurance this evening that the decision that you make will include us to some degree.
Let me respond to that. So what we were asked to do was to work, to see if we could work with PEC about pole type and placement.
Mhm.
So I don't think that would affect the routing and the recommendations we have today.
Okay, well, I think I'm taking two topics here all at once, but I appreciate that. But if you could just guarantee that if that's what we're stuck with, that you could guarantee some kind of involvement, but to also, I guess I just still don't
Right,
understand.
and I appreciate that, because
Okay.
it does seem like what would be the impact to all these citizens for this project, but this is one project, so take into account all the other projects throughout the year that we're asking our citizens to foot the bill for.
Understood. But
Right, so this one affects y'all, I realize, that's why
Right.
we're having this dialogue.
Right.
But our citizens are being asked to fund lots of other
And
projects.
I get that.
So
I
to
mean, I've
ask
been on the
them to
receiving
foot
end
a
of
higher
that, but
bill overall, because
Mhm.
it'll just add to the rest of the pot that they already
Right,
paid.
understood. But because, I mean, it's running through our property, but we're not getting a benefit out of it, for one. And not that we don't want to be there for our neighbors and our citizens and so forth, but, you know, if there could be some understanding on why the 1431 doesn't work, but at a minimum, if you could guarantee this evening that we would be involved in the placement of those poles and the type, and that we don't have a pole farm, like she said, that would be great.
So-
We could get that this evening.
Can I interject in that? So Pedernales Electric Cooperative is a co-op, which means we're all members of the utility. Right now, they're in the middle of elections for new representatives for this area. So I think that, you know, you could go straight to the person running to represent the board in this area.
Yeah, the election
And-
already happened, and we
Okay,
voted, and
but still, Emily Pataki, was she reelected? Does anybody know? She's not? Okay. I know she is for Cedar Park, so.
but I appreciate the direction, thank you.
I'm sorry. So
No,
I was
no,
just
no.
throwing that out.
No, I appreciate that, thank you.
Oh,
And
you're
We'll
welcome.
reach out to them, but again, and we will do what we can on our end, but I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
I think Mr. Archer has something, I have another citizen as well.
Just to address the issue of some of the pole issues, we have had a number of meetings with PEC discussing the removal of existing poles when they place new poles, rather than leaving them abandoned as stub poles carrying comm lines, which does happen sometimes. We understand that concern. We've spoken to PEC at length about it. PEC has committed that they'll make sure that all of those poles are removed expeditiously. We also, in terms of pole locations, there is very little flexibility on pole locations for the route. What typically happens is a pole is set between property lines because there's a service that goes to that adjacent house. That typically sets pole locations. So new poles are going in the location where most old poles already exist, with the exception of the 7 poles that I showed that would be new. Otherwise, they're in the exact location where the old poles were located, because that's where a service drop is required. In terms of pole type, that's a conversation that I can't answer. That's something that PEC would need to address.
So we don't know with the new poles and the self-supporting poles what that
The new
variation looks like.
non-self-supporting poles would be wood. What the self-supporting poles would be, PEC has, I think, a variety of different approaches on that, and that would be a conversation that we could have with PEC's Cedar Park office.
Thanks.
Aaron, I have a quick question, if it's okay, with Ann.
Okay, yeah, Liz. Yeah, Liz, if you're gonna address anything, you have to be up at the podium. So.
The pole abandonment issue is one of the biggest ones, if they're just left sitting there and they've got an old telephone line up. So thank you for that commitment. That's a big one for us.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Carolyn Douglas, and I am not a part of North Rim, but I am the downhill one. My property is probably most affected by both Route 1 and Route 2. The southern route crosses the back part of my property through the floodplain, and I really don't understand about that route. When it was first evaluated by Walker Partners, they came in and looked at the floodplain and the cliff and said, oh, we don't want to go that way. That's not feasible. It's much more reasonable to go on the other side of your property and up the frickin' hill. Neither route is reasonable. You cannot PEC is never going to be able to maintain that route. The lake just backed up across the back of my property where those poles are in the last flood. I just don't understand the logistics of this. I've been talking to PEC because I just had my 3 poles in the floodplain in the pasture for Southern Route removed because it's ridiculous to have a power pole in the floodplain, especially for a water system, if it's that important to you. I'm worried about wildfire danger. I'm not hearing anything about that, but PEC has not been able to maintain along where Route 1 was going to go for 20 years. They can't get there. So I want those kinds of things addressed before you pick a route. And I really sincerely hope that you will have a town hall meeting, include these people, PEC, LCRA, the fire department. I mean, there's a lot more research that needs to be done before you pick a route. The reason 1431 makes the most sense is for safety to the community and for you to have a consistent water supply. So I hope you will consider having that town hall meeting. It's very important to me, and the transparency of this whole process has been ridiculous, and I'm just livid right now, so I apologize, but I hope you will consider a town hall meeting and really getting the right parties together, because I'm not getting clear answers on any of this, and it's unacceptable to treat people like that. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Any other citizen comments or questions? And I think someone had a question. I don't know, Secretary Shaw?
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good.
Well, I started to make a motion. I don't know, after some of the comments, I don't know where the officer's comfort is with moving forward with the resolution. We got some good feedback on ongoing discussions and conversations for the design, but.
Well, let me just add to the Southern Route. So I have been talking with PEC extensively about the Southern Route. They went out there with their staff and looked at it and said it looked good. And then they took their management out there recently as well. In my opinion, from listening to what they've said, they have examined it pretty thoroughly and feel comfortable that, in fact, I think that is, they say that's really their preferred alternative.
So do we have a motion or no?
I can restate it.
I'll second your motion.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion selecting the Southern Route. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, motion passes. And I look forward to conversations of how we can mitigate some of the concerns.
Absolutely, I'll take the lead. I will take the lead on setting that up.
Thank you. Okay, and moving on to item 6B. Consider an update regarding the Phase 2 schedule.
Okay, we're going to transition now and talk about the Phase 2 water project. And I'm going to go through a number of things that are really focused on the schedule of Phase 2 in this presentation, starting with the review of water demand projections, which have always driven the timing of Phase 2 to make sure that the water from the Phase 2 project is available when you need it. So we'll look at those demand projections and how they impact the project phasing and timing. And then I'm going to drill down into a little bit more detail on some schedule considerations to let you understand what our current schedule is and how that schedule could be modified, and then give you an update on the final design of Phase 2 and a couple really important coordination items that are coming up that do have the ability to influence schedule. So as you know, the Phase 2 raw water delivery system is the next phase of BCRUA's raw water project to reduce drought vulnerability and provide ultimate capacity to the BCRUA water treatment plant, but also to provide water to the Cedar Park and Leander water treatment plants. The intake is located in Valente up in the upper left-hand corner with the pump station located on Lime Creek Road adjacent to Cedar Park's plant. Those facilities are connected with a deep tunnel, the blue line, and then the yellow line is another tunnel conveying water back to the existing Phase 1 raw water line on Trails End Road. If you look at the raw water capacity allocation for the three cities, Cedar Park and Leander's capacity includes their capacity in BCRUA's water plant and also the capacity of their existing water plants on Lake Travis. The total capacity of Phase 2 is 144.7 MGD at build-out. So looking at demands, every couple of years we work with the cities to look at their water demand projections that each city develops and how much water the cities will need from the BCRUA water treatment plant. And that is the yellow line on this graph. It increases from 2020, a peak day demand of about 12 MGD up to a demand of around 40 MGD in 2030. The dashed blue line is Phase 1C, which is an expansion to the floating intake in the water treatment plant that's currently under construction, scheduled to be completed this year. It will increase the capacity to the BCRUA plant to 32.5 MGD. After 32.5 MGD, there is no more additional raw water capacity. So that means that Phase 2 needs to be online before the yellow line crosses the dashed blue line, which is the capacity that you'll have for your existing facilities at that time. And if you look at that closely, what it means is certainly in the summer of 2028, the Phase 2 system would need to be online. And in the summer of 2027, it's very close, but it appears at this point that it's slightly below the existing capacity if I look at the three cities' demand projections cumulatively. Now, when you drill into a little bit more detail on that yellow line, each city has their own growth projections, and each city has their own capacity in Phase 1C at the water treatment plant right now. Once Phase 1C is completed, Cedar Park and Round Rock will both have a capacity of 8.7 MGD out of the plant. Leander will hold the difference at 15.2 MGD. And based on those capacities coming out of BCRUA's plant, Cedar Park would reach that capacity in 2033. Leander would exceed that capacity at the plant in 2026, and Round Rock would exceed it in 2028. So that if the Phase 2 system came online in summer of 2027, which is the current project schedule, which I'll show in more detail in a minute, it means that there's about a 1.3 MGD difference that Leander would need to make up to get through to that time to find additional water. This is the current project schedule that was developed at the beginning of the final design phase when we kicked off final design back in January of 2019. Final design will continue through summer of next year when it will wrap up. And on our current schedule, we would move into bidding phase and ultimately into construction phase in early 2022, which would wrap up in about mid-2027, about summer of 2027. You'll see on this, there's a couple other important milestones. The yellow dots pertain to coordination with the Texas Water Development Board to get funding for construction of Phase 2. They have an annual period that you apply for funding. BCRUA has gone through that process 2 times already. You apply at the end of the year, the funds become available the following fall. So on our current schedule, we would submit a funding application to the Water Development Board this coming spring, starting that process in the winter, and those funds would become available before construction begins in 2022. I also want to point out the yellow line, which is the PEC Temporary Power Project. That's a project that needs to be completed by PEC before our contractor mobilizes on site so that the site is cleared and ready for them to work, because there's a number of utilities on that site that need to be relocated, and it brings power supply to that site for the contractor. And I'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. Looking at the demand projections, if BCRUA elected to target a plant startup before summer of 2028, it does allow the schedule to slide a little bit. It's not quite a year in all of these activities because of some of the windows in which construction and activities need to occur, but it's generally in the 9 to 12-month period that these activities would slide. With the SWIFT application going to the Water Development Board the following year in 2022, and construction starting at the beginning of 2023 instead of early 2022. So everything pushes back a little bit, and the system would still be online before summer demands of 2028. Now, I want to talk about if you ended up sliding the schedule in that fashion, what some of the impacts of that delay would be, and I'm really only focused on the construction elements of that project, not talking about delays to final design or delays to the 1C plan expansion. The first is based on cost estimates for the project. It's about a $6 to $10 million annual increase in construction cost at a 3 to 4% escalation rate, which was the right thing to assume until more recently, and I couldn't speculate on what COVID has done to that at this point, on the short term or the long term. When you do end up having gaps between design and construction, there is always, of course, a risk that there are changes to design codes or permitting standards that could require a modification or an update to the contract documents before you bid them. It's an unknown. It's just a risk that you should be aware of that can happen. There's also, in that gap time between the end of final design and the start of construction, of course, there's ongoing agency and stakeholder coordination with the public. There's a lot of balls in the air in those regards, and you wouldn't just set those down until construction. You would continue to advance that. And then there's a risk of organizational changes, whether that's on the design consultant team or actually within the 3 cities. This project includes the efforts of a large number of people. And so there's always a chance that workload, other project assignments, or retirements occur during that time period that you would need to work through. And then lastly, as you move further away from 2026, the capacity demand variance that I pointed out for Leander continues to grow. It grows at a rate of around 1 to 1.5 MGD per year. So let me give you an update on Phase 2 final design. We did reach a really important milestone on that project in February of this year, where we completed the 60% design for the project. We've now moved into working on 90% design, and that effort will wrap up at the beginning of January 2021. We have here a couple of the renderings from our 60% effort for the intake facilities and also the pump station facility on Lime Creek Road, a section cut from the 3D model of the pump station and the pump station building. So I want to talk about some upcoming Phase 2 activities that we're working through on 90% that have the ability to influence schedule. And the first is the construction of that PEC temporary power project. I've got a map to the right that shows what those upgrades are. Essentially what PEC needs to do is they're going to have to do some line upgrades from Trails End Road and 1431 down to the pump station site, in addition to a bunch of utility relocations so the contractor can start work. We worked for several years with PEC to put together a letter agreement on that particular construction contract to make sure that, given the importance of it and given that it's on the critical path, that we had a very clear understanding with them about who was doing what on that project. Design right now is currently underway. It's scheduled to be completed this summer and would be available then to move into construction. The construction cost estimate, the last time I checked with the design engineers advancing that work with PEC, was about $4.6 million. And the funding for that project, Cedar Park obtained funding from the Texas Water Development Board with the 2018 SWIFT application, and Leander and Round Rock have available savings from Phase 1A of the project to pay for construction. In terms of the start of construction, the earliest I think that project could probably start construction is around October. After you wrap up design, there's time that you need to go through with PEC to make sure that they bring their contractor on board and they can determine those costs and pass those costs on. They need to be paid up front to PEC. There's also a pretty significant portion of the south part of this alignment is in Balcones Canyon Land Preserve. And BCP has requirements to avoid clearing during the nesting season for golden cheek warbler. There, you cannot go in and do clearing basically between March 1st and August 31st. So you can't start before August 31st anyways to begin the clearing effort that would be required on the south end of this project where most of the heavy lifting is going to be done for construction. So an early start date of October I think is reasonable. And then on the other hand, a late start date of January is about as long as you can wait to give the contractor time to get out there and tackle that clearing before the next nesting season begins on March 1st. What that means for this board and your city councils is that actions would be required to utilize those funds and to authorize construction not later than October. If those approvals aren't really in place by October, then you would by default move to that modified schedule because these power improvements would not be in place and you would have that lag waiting for the next opportunity to get out and complete the project. Another major item of coordination coming in the next half of this year is the Texas Water Development Board's SWIFT application. I know that we've been through this a couple times as a group together, and the process that we've used successfully in the past is that the board engages their FAs and the engineering team to complete the application in November. And then Water Development Board opens the application process in December. And the first step is to submit a short abridged application that's usually due around the beginning of February. That's also the same time bond counsel gets involved in the project. They'll review all of the applications and rank them and send out invitations to submit the full application, generally around the beginning of April, and they give you around 30 days to complete the full application that you turn back into them with the loan closing in early November. So we have that window coming up towards the end of this year. If you miss that funding window, then you wait another year, which would by default push you from the current project schedule to the modified project schedule. And then lastly, I wanted to give an update on phase 2, on what we had coming out of the 60% design. A cost estimate was prepared for the 60% design, and it has a cost of $173.7 million. The cost estimate was being developed in the middle of COVID-19 really ramping up, so there is a disclaimer on the cost estimate. It doesn't consider those impacts right now, and there will likely be impacts that might be noticeable when we work on the 90% cost estimate, but this estimate considers the economic conditions that preceded COVID. There are 2 additional aspects of the phase 2 project that really need to be included when you think about cost for phase 2. One is there's another phase of PEC improvements that would need to be complete before the pump station comes online. We call that the final power improvements project. It's mostly an upgrade to their substation to provide power. It also includes line upgrades, including the upgrades through the North Rim area as part of that. So that would be completed concurrent with construction of the phase 2 project. And then there's bid and construction phase services, both of those totaling in the neighborhood of about $26 million, which puts the grand total for phase 2, looking at all those different elements, at just under $200 million. We looked at the construction schedule back coming out of preliminary engineering in 2016 and determined that 5 years is appropriate for this project. We've looked at that a couple times since and continued to confirm that budgeting 5 years for this project is appropriate for the construction phase. And we do have a 90% cost estimate that will come out in March of next year that we can share with you guys at that time. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Board, do you have any questions?
So Aaron, just curious, the COVID impact, I mean, how or why or how would that impact the numbers?
What we're finding right now is contractors are working on their backlog, but there's been a slowdown in general. A number of the large contractors, we're in a heavy contractor outreach effort right now. And a lot of those contractors that are going to be looking at this project, they're large national and international contractors. Many of those contractors, a lot of their workforce is working in the oil and gas sector, and that's completely dried up. So they're working through their backlog, but at the end of that, they're going to have some light at the end of the tunnel. I think that if this continues the way that it's gone, they're likely to be quite a bit hungrier later this year and the beginning of next year than you would have found even 6 months ago. And so that's good because it entices more bidders to come after it, which always makes a project more competitive. It's also likely to result in more competitive costs because they want to get the project to get their crews busy. But it's also impacting everything from commodities. And one of the things that's really siphoned a lot of talent away from the water wastewater sector is commercial development. There's a lot of staff that go from these contracting firms, field level staff that go work on commercial projects. And as that slows down, that effect kind of reduces as well. So there's a number of things at play that are kind of opportunistic in terms of bidding a project. It's the same thing that happened at phase 1A of BCRUA's system. The costs were very, very high as cost estimates were coming out in 2007. And then right as that project was bid in 2008 after the Great Recession, those costs went way down, which is why there's still 15 years later phase 1A savings that we're talking about.
Okay. So not necessarily a negative impact. It could be a positive and more competitive bid and or
it's when I say that, it's mostly on the positive side with potential decreases in prices.
All right, thank you.
Any other comments? I appreciate the update and just the due diligence. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Moving on. I put my agenda away, but item 7, Director, closing comments.
Yes, so I'd like to take an opportunity to say we understand that this may be your last board meeting that you're presiding as president. And so as a board and staff, they have found you a very nice little plaque for you. And I would like to take an opportunity to read what it will say, but it does say, in recognition of your dedication and efforts on behalf of Brushy Creek Regional Utility Authority, Incorporated, a regional partnership with Cedar Park, Leander, and Round Rock, Ann Duffy, Board President, July 2019 through July 2020. Your service to the citizens is greatly appreciated. And then also just a few other notes, certainly commend you and proud of the fact that you are 13 years in the U.S. Naval Reserve. And certainly you've been serving on the City Council since 2017 and as Mayor Pro Tem during the year May 2018 to May 2019. So again, thank you very much. I'll have this sanitized for you and deliver it to you with a mask. But thank you for your efforts and for your time and dedication to that role.
It's awesome. Thank you. Unexpected. So.
Thank you. Well said. I agree. Thank you for everything you've done over the last year and leading this organization. Appreciate everything you do. And everybody, thank you for coming out tonight.
Okay, the remote guys. Secretary Shaw.
Yeah, y'all said this was going to get easier. I don't believe you anymore.
Director Baker.
I just want to thank you again, President, for your service on this board, and just appreciate your guidance and leadership and the other things that Mr. Flores discussed. And none of these decisions are easy, so thank you for your patience and guiding us through these decisions. So thank you.
And Director Anderson.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I really feel for the residents of North Rim. This is just a very difficult situation, and it's been said by several people that it's kind of a lose-lose situation. I think that what the resolution that was made tonight is really just the best compromise that we could come up with, given options available to us. And I think the only hesitation there might have been as far as making any promises is we're kind of at the mercy of PEC to a certain degree here because it's their projects to build. But I certainly understand fully what your concern for what is going to remain once that project is constructed. And so I know that this board will do whatever we can to make sure that PEC is doing what they can.
And yeah, just to reiterate kind of what everyone's saying, and I know kind of with everything that's been going on lately, we all do a pretty good, or try to do a pretty good job of using lots of words, and I think ultimately it's more important to have meaningful conversations, and so I am committed. I plan to be on this board at least through the rest of my term, so that we have those conversations. Now that we've come to this decision of the route, let's get the stakeholders involved in what that looks like. Again, making compromises, again, probably not always going to see eye to eye on it, but this is where we are. So I appreciate everyone's time and commitment to getting us to this place. And thank you for letting me serve as president, indulging me, I guess, a little bit. So thanks. Meeting adjourned.